Not that you can't learn from things that aren't painful, but I think our greatest lessons come from the most painful things.
What's interesting is the definition of self-worth is what you believe you deserve.
I had a verbally abusive father, and so I didn't have a voice when I was little. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to create or to do things. He even would get angry when we had laughter or giggled in the house. My husband was unfaithful at one point in our marriage. That was the turning point of me really going inward, because I realized I was not holding up my end of the bargain in our marriage. I was not communicating with him. I was not giving him what he needed. I didn't even love myself at that point, so how could I love him the way he needed? There were two significant events in my life where I really started to change. One of them was...
Welcome back to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. I love having the real, raw conversations with some of the most impactful and influential people on this planet, whether you know their names or not. But you will know their names after the purpose of this show, because some of these people have stories that are relatable and accessible to you in a way that will be like no others. Today, I've got an awesome guest with me. I've gotten to know her a little bit over the course of the last year after meeting her at Amberly Lago's mastermind, where I did some hot seats, and we've stayed in touch. She's been an amazing supporter. She's shown up religiously for our Friday live show, and even was just recently a guest on it. As I've watched her flower and develop in this most recent year, it's been really cool to see her shift and step even further into her power. But Cristina Simmons is a speaker. She is the author of the best-selling book, Eat Your Feelings, and she also runs a publishing company called Soul Story Collective. But really, more than anything, she's an incredible woman with an incredible story and a heart for giving back. And she, after learning to love herself and connect and dial those things in, is now on a mission to empower other women using her truth as a platform. And Cristina, I'm super excited to be chatting with you today, my friend.
I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate you having me on. This is great.
Well, I love good people, right? I love good humans who I can see are both doing the work themselves as well as trying to pull others along. And no matter where somebody is in their particular journey, especially when I can see the humanity that's within them, I want to find ways to support, help, feature, wherever the case may be. And you definitely fit those definitions all the way across the board. My friend, you know this question is coming because you've been around my world long enough to know that it's the only question I ask on both shows after I first introduce the guest. So regardless of what I've said about you and the little bits of the ways that I introduced who you are in your words?
I always say that I'm a mom first, because that's been the biggest part of my personal journey. But I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, and now I can call myself a best-selling author, I'm a speaker, and I'm a publisher. So a lot of hats.
You do wear a lot of hats. And so I love that you started with the mom first, but I'm also going to challenge you just a little bit on this, because a lot of what you just said is just components of what you do, right? Despite the components of who you are. Now, being a mother, being a wife, being a believer in Jesus Christ and a follower, and all those are all meaningful. But there's so much more to you than the things that you do as well. So I'm going to ask you to take that question a little bit deeper. And if you were to describe yourself, who you are and the ways you show up in the world outside of what you do, how would you answer that question?
I can see myself as a healer now. And that's only because I'm still healing. I don't think we're ever fully healed, but I have done a lot of healing on myself. And I can see that now I can look into other people and see what their pain is and to help bring that out in them. And even I'm an encourager. I am definitely a poet and a writer, and I just recently became a painter.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Have you always viewed yourself as a creative person?
I didn't. Probably not in the mid part of my life. I think I did when I was a kid, and then I lost a lot of that because of all the things that happened in my life. And so I'm really excited about pulling that back out, because I do love to create. And I was telling someone else that now that I've started to paint, it's almost like I'm remembering to paint, like remembering how to paint when I've never really painted before. So it's really interesting.
So that is really interesting. And I want to play with that for just a second, because I think that's actually fascinating on lots of levels. When you say you've never really painted before, but you're remembering how to paint. 5-ish years ago, probably as little time as that, I don't know that I could have answered my belief system on this concept of like prior lives or multiple lives. And I know that some people, particularly people of faith, view that as in conflict of their own belief system or whatever the case may be. But why that resonated for me is I feel like in my own life, I've had multiple experiences where there's been a resonance, an understanding, or a wisdom that I can't explain based on this lifetime. It's like I'm knowing something or doing something again, but I don't have any concrete memories of it in this specific life. So, you even talked about, I'm like learning to remember this again. So what are your general beliefs on that kind of concept in general? And as you say, it's as if I'm remembering something, even though I haven't done it in this life. Can you describe that experience to people? Like, what is it that you're experiencing that feels familiar?
So, and I am a Christian, and I have talked to other believers on this topic, and we have differed. And the only way that I can explain it to them is that I am remembering things that I have never experienced, like you said, in this lifetime. I have had memories of dancing in the dirt and almost like in a tribal sort of sense, like things that I have obviously never done in this lifetime. And as I was painting, so my old self would have been Googling, YouTubing, researching what kind of paint to use, what kind of brush to use, how to stroke, you know what I mean? Like all of these things.
Because you didn't want to get it wrong.
And
you wanted to make sure it was right.
Exactly. I wanted it to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so, but the new version of me did not do that. I just walked outside, set up the easel, and started painting. And it was like, I just knew what colors to put together. I knew how much water to put on there. I knew how to do the brush strokes in a certain way to get the look that I wanted. It has been fascinating.
Well, you even hit on other memories beyond painting, right? That are these experiences that you've had. And like I said, I am a believer at this point in my life that I have at least resonance or some memory that's beyond this self, right? And again, take that for what it is in terms of belief systems. But to your point exactly, that's why I said oftentimes people who consider themselves a person of faith, it's not congruent. And yet you're allowing space to pursue what this means to you, which I really appreciate. You also suggested that you're intuitive, right? And I do believe that some of the pieces that you're even talking about are connected to intuition and the ability to actually even pick up on, receive, and interpret those signals or those energy resonances that exist. And so that's, I think, what I'd like to maybe explore just on this part a little bit deeper is, when did you start having these experiences that felt outside of this lifetime? And how have you been able to, I guess, tune into them to extract whatever imagery you described, like dancing in dirt in a place that you've never been, right? Like that's sometimes something that just comes to people. Sometimes it's learned and conditioned, but I'd love to know how you started to trust it.
I think I've always been sort of empathic, which is why my nervous system was always out of balance. Mm-hmm. So I think all my life I've been picking up other people's energies, but I didn't realize that's what was happening. And I didn't know how to clear that or to create a safe boundary around myself. And that's a little part of my story is I had a verbally abusive father. And so I didn't have a voice when I was little. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to create or to do things. He even would get angry when we had laughter or giggled in the house. So it was a very strange growing up. And then all of these energies coming at me all at once. As a kid, obviously you don't know what to do with that. But then as I got older, I had so many trouble with relationships. And I think I was taking on other people's pain, other people's insecurities. And so then once I started realizing that, because of getting into the spaces like of Amberly Lago and all of these wonderful people that we are connected with now, I started to realize that I was being a mirror, so sometimes what I was feeling or seeing was because it was being reflected to me. And so I had to figure out how to put that mirror up in front of myself and reflect it back to them. Like, this is not mine. And that's a journey. It's been a lot of work.
Huge journey, and it's not, I think, a simple one either. I was just in a conversation with somebody actually after a keynote I gave the other day who came up after my talk, and we were discussing stuff. And the biggest thing that she brought up was this happening within her daughter, and she's got a 5-year-old, right? Who's very empathetic, very empathic, very intuitive. And it's a conversation I've been having with my daughter for the last 4 years because she fits all those same descriptions, is the identification between what energy is yours and what energy isn't yours. And there are some people who never find that level of clarity. So you talked about some dynamics where you started to be able to lean into that. How today are you able to identify what's yours, what isn't yours? And how do you separate the energy that's not yours, given that so many of us that are like this absorb it?
It's because I've learned to know myself better. So with my self-awareness, I can now sort of separate, because now I know how I react to certain situations. I know what my triggers are. And so if I start to feel a certain way and I'm with a group of people, I kind of realize like, that's not how I would typically react to this situation. So I have to sort of step back and say, okay, well, maybe that's this person's, or maybe that's the group as a collective. Cause that's a whole nother thing. When you're in a big group of people, some of these rooms that we go into, there's so much energy in there that it's hard to tell whose is what. But it's self-awareness. And that's what I had to really learn to know me, which I didn't feel like I knew myself before. I felt for a long time like I was watching a movie from the outside. It was almost like I was very disassociated because of a lot of the trauma that I've been through. And so just sitting with me and really working through the feelings, even the crappy ones, really helped me to distinguish what's mine and what's other people's.
You started the answer to the first question with "I'm a mom" first. And I know that you and I have some similarity even in our experiences as parents, just because of some of the unique elements of our children. But I don't want to be the one to put any words to any of that for you. And so I guess that's what I'd ask is what has been your experience so far as a mom? And in that being one of the many roles that you play, what has it taught you about yourself?
So my motherhood journey started with finding out that my husband and I carried a very rare gene. And so we had 3 infants that passed away, plus I had a miscarriage in between. But what our first daughter taught me, and I've only learned this in probably the past 6 months, was what true unconditional love is. And for a long time, I couldn't talk about her without crying, and I still may cry. So
I was going to say, as soon as you started talking about her, I could see it behind your eyes. But it's okay. Whether they come or not, we know that it's real. So,
but I couldn't talk about her ever without crying. And I've been working with with another healer, and she sort of flipped it for me and said that it's not sadness that you're feeling. It's that overwhelming feeling of unconditional love. And that is so big. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have kids and you realize, like when you hold that baby for the first time, that is a love that like you can't explain to somebody else who hasn't experienced that. And so she taught me also how to be a safe space, because when she was born, we didn't think she was going to live through the birthing process, but we ended up having 3 days with her. But every time I would hold her, all of her vital signs would tank, and the bells and the whistles would be going off, and I would freak out and I would run out of the room because I didn't think that I could be with her when she passed. And so then one of the grandmothers would come in and they would hold her, and then all of her vital signs would come up. Everything would stop beeping and everything was fine. So this happened over the course of 3 days. And the day before she passed, I had kind of a dream or a vision that she was waiting for me. Like I was her person. I was the only space her safe space that she'd ever known. And so I decided that night that I needed to hold her when she took her final breath. And so that's what we did. But that's definitely what she taught me. And then when we adopted, we lost 2 girls and a boy, and we were so fortunate to adopt 2 girls and a boy. So I have twin 21-year-olds that were born on Christmas Day, nonetheless. So they were a miracle in themselves. And then our son was born about 3 months, maybe after we had our last child pass, which was our son. And at the age of 4, our adopted son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And so that was a whole nother journey that I was never prepared for, but am grateful for, because he has taught me so much about the nervous system and body awareness and how to communicate without words. Sometimes we need to stop talking and we need to just sit and feel and use our energy instead of our mouths. So that's the biggest lesson that he's taught me.
It's actually really beautiful to hear you talk about your daughter and what she taught you first. And even the dynamics of the energy shift that you experienced. I mean, I'm sure that you've experienced this with your son as well. I know that we have with ours, both of our kids having their own specialty neurodiversities, our son being on the spectrum. But, it's the whole idea of when they get home after school, they just like fall to pieces, right? And it's like their sensory, they've got no impulse control, no executive functioning. Their emotions are like all through the gate, like all over the place sometimes. And it in a lot of cases for many people can feel and be experienced as, what am I doing wrong? Why are they able to hold it together everywhere else all the time? And yet then they come home and they're a disaster. But even in the 3 days you had with your daughter, it was the safety that you provided that allowed her to just be unregulated, to be completely who she needed to be in that moment because of the concept of unconditional love. And that's what I think is so powerful, even in how you told the story, is we experience that still today with our son on the spectrum, right? Where he is the most difficult he ever is, almost always, every day after school, and even worse at the end of the week, right? And it's like sometimes just getting through the evening, but trying to find the ways to connect the dots and regulate and give grace and space so that it's just not always this, because it's just a part of the regulation and the development. I don't like to ask close-ended questions, and I've asked you a couple today, but the way you articulated that with your daughter was so powerful, especially to have only experienced it in such micro moments over the course of 3 days. Was that lesson for you ingrained in that period of time that you had with her? Or is this something reflective that you've only recently understood? I think you said something as recently as 6 months. So I just don't know if that was the lesson you were talking about, but maybe talk to us about what it took for you to be able to realize this for the lesson that she taught you.
Yeah, I did not see that experience as unconditional love at the time. I was so in the middle of grief. I mean, you can imagine.
Yeah. Oh,
and
man.
it was, when you experience grief, I think everybody experiences a little bit differently, but it was like I was underwater. Everything was very muted and muffled. And I was so like on autopilot for so many years. Like I have big chunks of my life that I don't even remember. And it makes me really sad with my kids that my kids that are here, my adopted kids, because I don't remember a lot of their childhood. Because especially like once our son came along, he needed so much extra attention and we didn't know what in the world we were doing. And like you said, we thought we were doing everything wrong and we were terrible parents. Like, you know what I mean? And so there's just like, I'll even see pictures and I don't remember being there. There's just these big blank spaces. And so that's one of my regrets, I guess. If I don't like to say I have regrets, but, and I realize now that wasn't my fault, that the grief sort of stole that from me. Yeah. But this unconditional love piece, yes, I just really learned that in the past 6 months because I was looking at it as remembering her in sadness. Yeah. And so now I can remember her with love and admiration and gratefulness for what she taught me. And we've even, I've even had conversations of like, when we were on the other side, she and I made a soul contract and we had this whole conversation of like, okay, this sounds really cool. Like, I think I need to come to earth and I need to show people what unconditional love is. And so this is going to be my part. And then you're going to be my mom. And, it sounded really great. Like when we were souls. And then when you get here and you're a human being, it's terribly painful. Yeah. But you can't learn from things that aren't, not that you can't learn from things that aren't painful, but I think our greatest lessons come from the most painful things because you can't really experience joy unless you've experienced grief. Like you've got to know the difference.
Yeah, I would suggest there's so much truth in that. Thank you for going down that path and just kind of playing with some of those questions as we kind of started out the gate as well, because it is really important. And I do believe that our kids and our pasts and our patterns shape so much of the ways that we show up. And you even take it back, obviously, very early on to some of the dynamics that you had with your father. And so maybe take us back, whether it's into your childhood or later teens and early 20s, whatever seems like a relevant place for you. But you talked about how you silenced yourself, you retreated, you got quiet, right? At what point did you start to get out of that environment? What did that experience look like for you? And what was the process of going from where you were then to where you are now? And I realize that's a very broad, open question. It's intentional because I kind of want you to fill in the tops of the waves, whichever you think are relevant, that have kind of shaped you and prepared you for where you are today.
Yeah, I have answers to your questions, Brian. So there were two significant events in my life where I really started to change. One of them was when I was holding my daughter in the hospital and my father was there. And my father never apologized to anybody for anything. Like he was always right. If it wasn't his idea, it wasn't a good one. And I realize now, that, and I've forgiven him and all those things, but I realize now that he was only doing the best he could with what he had been taught. But in that moment in the hospital, when I was holding her, he apologized to me for the very first time and the only time in my life, and said that he was Catholic. And so he believed in the sins of the Father. And so he apologized and he said, I think that you are experiencing this because of the sins that I have done in my lifetime. And I'm so sorry for that. And in that moment, like while I was holding her, I realized that I had been trying to gain his approval, like my whole life, and holding my daughter that was not going to live very long. Like I realized that that's not how you're supposed to live your life. And I had the approval of my Heavenly Father. Like I was perfect to him, and I didn't need to gain the approval of my dad anymore. And if he wasn't proud of me, or if he wasn't able to say that to me, then that wasn't on me, that was on him. So I was very able to release that. And then something that we haven't touched on yet, but I had infidelity in my marriage. My husband was unfaithful at one point in our marriage. And that was the turning point of me really going inward, because I realized I was not holding up my end of the bargain in our marriage. I was not communicating with him. I was not giving him what he needed. I didn't even love myself at that point. So how could I love him the way he needed to be loved? And so that really set me on my personal development journey, was him being unfaithful in our marriage.
That dynamic in any relationship, and I'm going to say in particular for a female, it can go a couple of paths, right? It can turn into complete shame and blame. It can turn into just a complete battle. It can turn into an opportunity to have awareness and ownership. It can turn into separation. Like there's so many paths that can go. But, it's interesting because on one hand, I recognize and I want to honor and say this in absolute clarity so everybody hears what I see in front of me and what I believed in, how I'm hearing you say it. There is a ownership that you're able to take for the actions or lack of, or the dynamics that existed in your relationship that you can so clearly attribute to the patterns that led towards him making that decision, right? It's still his decision, his action. And yet there's as many situations, even in the way that you said that same language you used with the energy being slightly different could also be shame and blame versus ownership for the role. And they're very different, as I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
At what point in that process were you able to so clearly take ownership for what you contributed without shame and blame for yourself or for him? Because you talk about it from a place of just complete conviction today. But obviously in the time, there's heated emotions, lots of pain, lots of hurt in all directions. So how did that first hit you? And how did you find your way to the place of clarity that you're speaking from today?
Yeah, I'm not making excuses for him by any means. And, he made his decisions, but I think we just didn't know how to support each other in our grief. And side note to my husband, he came into the marriage in grief because his sister was killed when she was 16 and he was 18. And so he had never fully processed. Yeah, he had never fully processed that loss. And then to come into a marriage with a wife who was emotionally detached because of my verbally abusive father, and then to lose child after child after child, and then to have special needs children, and like, you know what I mean? It was just the perfect storm.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I've said a lot of times, like, if it were anybody else, like, a lot of our friends probably would have been divorced way before now. We'll be married 27 years in February.
Congratulations. And that's super cool.
Yes, thank you. And we are best friends. We are closer now than we ever have been. Not that we don't have our differences or whatever, but I think everything that we've been through has brought us closer together. But in that moment when he told me, I wasn't angry. It was very funny. I wasn't angry. I was disappointed because, he was my person, and I had been let down by so many people in my life. And I think that's why I was able to sort of turn inward, because I kind of said to myself, like, why do you feel like people keep letting you down? And part of that answer was I kept letting myself down. Yep. I wasn't keeping the promises that I had made to myself. I mean, I wasn't upholding my end of the bargain for anybody, but that had to start with me. And so by the grace of God, I guess I was able to see that and to move forward. And like I said, this has been years and years of work. And I still have more work to do, but that's why I just want to encourage.
Yeah, we all do. There is no final destination, like you said it before. But what I so appreciate, and you've heard me speak in times about the things that have happened with my wife and I and different dynamics. But there is as much truth to the fact that I brought shame and anger and big energy into our marriage as it was that she grew up with a dad that had anger and broke furniture when she was a kid. It's both. Right. And your ability to describe even what he came from, what you brought into it, and your shared experiences brings light to like how much these things can become big and complicated quickly. Right. And yet it doesn't have to be about shame and blame. It can be about understanding. And that's what I'm hearing through you. And you're right. It doesn't happen overnight, but your ability to even trace back what he had beforehand, what you had beforehand, and what you guys collectively had together is powerful. You said this, special needs is a big variable that, just like holding that baby and that unconditional love and connection that you can't explain to somebody unless they've had it, I don't believe you can explain to parents with neurotypical kids what it's like to have kids on the spectrum or neurodiverse children. I've talked about this in some lights on the show or publicly with the right people in the right venues, but I know it is an area that you and I both have shared, and there have been a couple of conversations we've had around really emotional moments and big breakthroughs and wins that your kids are having. So could you talk a little bit about, on the tail end of this loss, what was it like to be parents to a special needs kid? And what was the impact that had on you, the household, your marriage, in general? Because it's a big topic and you're still in it.
Yeah, I actually changed my entire trajectory of my career, because when we found out that he was on the spectrum, we got the diagnosis, that still didn't help us navigate the school system. There still wasn't a place for him. He was a very round peg in there was all kinds of different holes, but he didn't fit in any of them. And
my son doesn't fit in a single hole either. I love it. I love how you just said that. Such a perfect description.
He was too smart to be in like the specialized classes, but his emotional intelligence wasn't high enough to be in the typical classes. And so there just wasn't a place for him. And I as a mother, or a parent, we want to fix it. And so I decided at the age of 39 to go back to school to get my master's degree in occupational therapy, because I could not find help for him. We could not get him into any clinics. Everybody had a waiting list as long as your leg. We couldn't find anybody to come to the house. He was getting kicked out of every school he was ever in. Like, we had to homeschool for a while. We tried private school. That didn't work. We did homeschool a second time, which was just too much on me and my nervous system at the time, because I wasn't regulated at that point. So
much. Yeah.
And so then we finally had to put him into an autism school. But even that wasn't the right place for him, because he wasn't getting the academics there that he needed. And he's so freaking smart, like so smart. And I really believe that he can go to college. And so we've done a lot of work as a family. And I do want to answer that part of your question, the family dynamic, because for a lot of years, my husband and I fought, because my husband was from sort of the mind of, I'm the dad, and when I tell him to do something, he needs to do it, like used to happen with him and his dad. You know what I mean? And his brain just does not work like ours does.
I have that same pattern in moments that's difficult, and I'm still unwinding. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like, I totally get it. Yeah, yes, that's me. Yeah.
So we had to learn how to approach him, how to let him have a meltdown if he needed to, and how to, maybe we tag team. If I was getting upset, I would let my husband go in, or if he was getting upset, I would go in. And you talk a lot about how people use words. I have to be very specific with my words to him, because he's a very concrete thinker.
Literal. Yeah.
And so literal. And once a thought gets in there, you may play hell trying to get it out. I mean, it's just, you're not going to change his mind. And simple things like, I can't tell him to clean his room. I have to tell him to straighten his room. Just these little tiny nuanced things, you know what I mean? But for a long time, my husband... We could
trade stories for days on that kind of stuff, by the way. I guarantee it. It's like we live the same life, it sounds like.
Yeah. But my husband would say, he's running our household and he controls everything, and you just let him do whatever he wants to do. I mean, this was, years of fighting over this. And finally, I don't know what it was that clicked for my husband, but he started realizing that his tone of voice and his energy and the way that he approached him made all the difference. And so he's now a junior in high school. And his last year, his sophomore year, I actually took him out of the autism school and I put him into public high school, which was terrifying.
I remember how scared you were going into that. That was like what you were preparing for when we met. Yeah.
I think that I sent you like a voice message on Instagram DMs. Yeah. You did. And was like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. But I'm so proud of him. And not that we don't have our challenges, but he's doing so well, just so well. And so just could be prouder of him, but it's been a long road.
Yeah. And it's going to continue, right? I mean, that's just the truth. Like we continue to face it, but so many of the dynamics that you just discussed, it's anybody who's listening to this who doesn't have the direct perspective of having a special needs kid in the house still cannot even understand it based on your words. And yet, even what you just described, the level of communication that's required, and communication, particularly with like the pragmatic nonverbal type speech, is where it's really challenging because the words become even more important. And what you and I both know is the words are still less than 10% of our overall communication. And so when someone is so literal and so, I don't want to say rigid because I don't mean it as a bad thing, but like so literal that the words are going to be the primary form of communication. Any energy they don't understand, they can't interpret, but they respond to or react to. And then your words still have to be near perfect for them sometimes to even understand. But even what you talked about as it relates to communication, not just in the words with your son, but with your husband, I guarantee what your twin daughters had to be involved in dynamics of this and understanding and communication and grace and all of this. I would say that one of the greatest things I've extracted from being a father of a son that's on the spectrum, and by the way, now realizing I probably am also, and probably did all the same things as a kid, is the importance and the development of even stronger, clear communication, right? That's one of the greatest gifts that I think I've extracted from it, is the importance of that with everybody in every situation. How would you say that being his mother for the last, I'm going to call it 17-ish years if he's a junior, somewhere in there, what would you say that being his mother has done for you as it relates to your communication and your clarity?
I think it gives you a new perspective on just people in general. I guess, I don't know. I often give people grace. Maybe I give too much grace, but I really try to see the good in everybody. And because that's one of the things that I was worried about with my son, was sending him to school, because his communication skills are not always stellar. Yeah. And he can't tell people what he wants or what he's feeling. And so we work on that a lot at home. But, when you're in the moment and all, your nervous system is all dysregulated, and sometimes you can't think of your tools and your strategies in that moment. But, I always kind of look at other people and try to see, well, maybe they're having a really hard day, or maybe, maybe something just happened to them before they came into the situation. So that's how I try to communicate with people, is just maybe my form of communication sometimes is actually listening, because I think we don't listen to other people enough. We're so busy talking about ourselves and what we're doing and what's happening and all those things, that sometimes the best form of communication is just to be quiet.
Yeah, I agree completely. But what I also know about my wife, and what I have witnessed even in my own ability where I've got empathy, and you suggested this for yourself. So I believe that I have a sense in this, but I also know your intentionality. So it'll be interesting to see where you go. One of the things, what's interesting is our daughter is not on the spectrum, but there are some different processing things, and she's hearing impaired and has dyslexia. So there were just some communication challenges that have developed in both of our kids, because my wife is so intuitive and so empathetic. Even though I've been able to play this role as well, my wife would know what both of my kids wanted and still do to this day, even if they don't have words to do so, which in some ways has also been difficult in our interactions, because I'm challenging them to utilize those tools and those words wherever possible. And for her, because sometimes it's just easier, words aren't needed, and we're 5 steps down the road because she knows, they know, and everybody knows. Yet we have to prepare them for when they're outside of our homes, right? And as much as that's a gift for any kid to have a parent that can know without any words needed, it also can become a crutch and a challenge. How often are you able to communicate with your son without words? And through, whether it's your role as an occupational therapist or your knowledge and understanding of the importance of this communication as you've developed as a mother over time, have you been able to break that potential pattern that exists within you, if it's real, and start to really utilize words as the primary form of communication for him?
We write a lot of things down, like especially if I need him to do several things, we make a list, because that's another thing about a lot of kids on the spectrum. They're very visual, because they have so many processing, and he actually has diagnosed auditory processing dysfunction. And so, and that was another thing, I told my husband, I said, it's not that he's not listening to you. I said, he's just processing it a lot slower than you are expecting him to.
Yep.
So that's another thing. Like I can't I can't throw a bunch of things at him at one time. I have to break them down. So like at the room cleaning example, there's several things that need to be taken place in order to straighten a room, but I can give him one thing at a time. Can you please put your dirty clothes in the hamper and then come tell me when that's done? Can you please clean all of the thousands of water bottles? I don't know why he's got 10 million water bottles in his room.
My son, I just made him go through his room. He pulled out 15 water bottles in his room. I'm like, why do you need 15 water bottles in your room? I love that.
I'm like, are we running a recycling plant? What are we doing in here? He likes the sound, though. He likes to crunch them.
It's a fidget,
so that I don't know if that. Yeah. So anyway, but I have to break things down into very specific tasks. And like I said, a lot of times we use a list. So we're still using words, but they may be written words. Because he really does. I mean, I have to say like one sentence and let him process it. And then, and I sort of watch him. And like you said, I'm sure your wife does the same thing. I know his body language and, if he starts to tense or if he's thinking about something, how his eyes move or, maybe he tilts his chin up a little bit and he, like we learn those things as parents. Just to sort of let him process this. But I think that's the biggest thing is just to not throw too much at them at one time.
Yeah. And frankly, even as you suggested with your husband in the communication, I mean, sometimes for us, I had to even learn that if I spoke to him from across the room and he was in the middle of something else, it's not that he couldn't hear me, but he couldn't hear me, right? Like there was no registering that anybody was even talking. And so I would have to walk over and I still have to do this. And my wife does this to me, right? Because I get the same way. Like, and I would have to like put my hand on him and say, Blake, did you hear me talking to you? Right? No, Dad, were you talking? Like, and there were prior periods where I would react and I'd get upset. Like, why are you not listening to me? Why you can't hear me? But it's literally, it didn't even register. And our son's got ADHD as well. I don't know if you guys have this, by the way. We invested in one of those skylight calendars. And it has been a game changer because we can literally programmatically like have those task lists, those written down activities and duties, the basic daily care stuff, the chores, the little things that need to be done in a place so that there, at least his one rhythm is to go check there and check off stuff. Cause if we give a verbal list or even we give a written list, one item at a time is it. And yet it also, I think, gives us even more ability to better understand how to break things down into pieces. To not just have the assumptive elements of what we believe we should or shouldn't know, or someone else should or shouldn't know. You've heard me say before that I grew up in a household where there was like one right way to do everything. I just didn't know the right way until I got it wrong. Right. And yet each one of those right ways probably had 10 or 15 different steps involved in it. And yet I was never given the breakdown of each step. I so appreciate how you communicate about this because the other side of this as well is you talk about your ability to see people's pain, your ability to lean into intuition. And yes, you've identified and said that you've been an empath in the past. Yes, you've been an occupational therapist. So you've learned and trained in language, pragmatic, non-pragmatic movements in different ways. But all that said, all of these things are only additive to who you already are and the skill sets you already had. So what has being a mother of your son, going to occupational therapy, having to have overcome all these things done to heighten your intuition and your ability to communicate with others?
Yeah, I think it makes me look at people as a whole, not just one thing or maybe one thing that they've done or one thing that or like you said, the things that we do. I really like to look at people holistically. I think that's why I fell in love with occupational therapy because they really do take into account the whole person and not just like, say if you go to physical therapy, they're just working on your shoulder that's hurt or your knee or whatever, they're just looking at that one part. But there's so much more that goes into a human being. I mean, and I know from personal experience, like a lot of my mental anguish and trauma manifested in physical ailments. So, just because you have a shoulder problem, it doesn't mean it's because you fell on it or you know what I mean? Like it may be coming from something that happened way back in your past. So that's another thing. Like you really just have to look at everything. And I just had a conversation with my husband this morning because we were working out together and he was complaining that his shoulder was hurting. And so, I was trying to give him tips on, well, maybe try this or do that. And he wasn't accepting my help. But it was like he was a 12-year-old boy. Like he got really snappy and snippy and like, and I said, what is happening here? I said, I'm not trying to tell you how to do this or what you need to do. Like he does that. I don't know, something, we talk about this all the time because I'm like, I need you to sit with your 12-year-old self and have a conversation and see where this is coming from. Because anytime anybody ever tries to give him criticism, he turns into that 12-year-old boy. And so there's so many things that happened to us in childhood that affect us in adulthood. Like it's wild. So yeah, person as a whole.
It is completely wild. And you're right. I mean, it can be so simple. It can be just a nuance, a look that somebody gives you, communication, but you'll appreciate this. I hope I don't butcher it, but I saw a video that was featuring an organization. It's an autism based organization. And they just released these t-shirts, and the saying on the t-shirt, and they focused on this in their workplace, and they did a really cool job with it. But it said something like, "Don't hear what I didn't say." And how often is that the case where we either believe we're communicating something and our words, actions, and behaviors don't represent it, or the person on the other side is receiving it through their own filter of their 12-year-old boy or whatever, and they hear something that's completely different. And especially with the literal thinking around autism, I loved that shirt. Don't hear what I didn't say. There's so much power to that because you even said it's like one of the best ways to communicate is actually to listen and to listen beyond the words in so many ways. And you've become as close to a master as I'm going to suggest is possible at this point in your life, because it's clear how you communicate about these things today. But all of these hits led to you eating your feelings literally, which, by the way, I did as well. And that is the name of the book. That is a big component of what you focus on. But let's talk about that, right? You've talked so much about these trauma components, these unexpected hits, all of the divides that took place even within your marriage. How did that show up for you in eating your feelings? How did you use food to process? And what did that foundation lead into as it relates to the structure in your book to allow your truth to free other women?
Because of all my work, my background as occupational therapist, and my son's sensory system, because he's so sensory and he had so much trouble with food all through the years because of textures. I was literally standing in the pantry one day and I was upset about something. I don't remember specifically what I was upset about, but I realized that when I would get upset, I would go straight to the pantry. And so depending on what feeling I was having is what I was looking for to eat. So if I'm anxious, I want something crunchy or salty. So I want that input in my mouth. The feeling of the crunching somehow calms me. But if I'm sad, I want like a pudding substance or a cake, something thicker or something like that. And if I'm angry, I want like a hearty chili or a big fat hamburger. Or, you know what I mean? So because of all the work with him and trouble with food and his sensory system, it just clicked one day. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm literally eating my feelings. Like why, because I didn't want to feel whatever that feeling was at the time. I didn't want to feel it. I wanted to avoid it. And so I redirected to food. And a lot of that comes from my childhood and my dad, because I remember he would eat in the middle of the night. And I often say, if he wasn't a drinker, food was his drug of choice. And he was always very unhealthy and so overweight and had diabetes. And he passed about 2 years ago. And that's ultimately why, because he just did not take care of himself. But I remember hearing at like 3 a.m. in the morning, him beating a bowl of ice cream, because I think he thought, well, if nobody sees me eat it, then I didn't eat it at all. And so I think somehow subconsciously I sort of learned, that because I would hide food, like my adolescent, college, like all those years, you know what I mean? Like I found myself hiding food or, putting the wrapper of something that I ate way underneath the trash can so other people didn't see that I ate it. Like it was a real shameful thing in my life. But if somehow it became shameful and safe at the same time. And so that's what I used to navigate the feelings that I didn't want to feel.
There's a lot, even in the answer that you just gave. And there's even some components that potentially surfaced for me that if it comes into a place of clarity, I'll share with you. But You talk about this pattern of hiding food, both in hiding where you had snacks, but also in hiding wrappers so people didn't see it. Where, other than witnessing your father, where in your life was food either used as motivation, criticism, or were you criticized for your food habits?
So I was made to stay at the table as a child until I cleared my plate. And I think that's where it really started, because I was a very picky eater as a kid. And my mom was a nutritionist. So she was making like spinach and okra and liver and all these, just things that kids did not want to eat. And so I would spend hours at the dinner table just sitting in front of a plate of cold food because I refused to eat it. And I would not be allowed to get up until I cleared my plate. So I think that's where it really started. Because that's where the shame came from.
You and I definitely have like so many shared experiences. That was literally how my household was. We had to eat everything that was put on our plate, even if we were full most of the time. And if we did not eat it in that sitting, it would be in the fridge and we would have to eat whatever's left on that plate cold for our next meal. And I don't say that with criticism for my parents. Like, I get all the reasons why that happened. Both of them had food insecurities at different points earlier in their lives, and it developed their belief systems. But it did condition my relationship with food in an interesting way. Right. And even to the point that you just even suggested, it's like, yeah, I'm sitting there eating things for hours while it's cold. And I guess what I would ask specifically is, because I know that what these are for me, but what would you say are the beliefs, the narratives, intellectually or emotionally, that were formed around food because of those experiences when you were a kid?
Well, they definitely weren't good. And then, as you get older, food is everywhere. I've often said if I were an alcoholic, I could just stop hanging out with people who drink, but you have to eat. And then when you're trying not to eat these things, or you're feeling guilty about eating the things, and you're in a crowd of people, it just piles it on top. You know what I mean? Like it's just, you can't get away from food. And so I really had to build a better relationship. I say that I built a better relationship with the food, but it was really the relationship with myself. Yeah. I had to learn to love myself and to learn that food was a nourishment to my body, not a punishment or a celebration, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what a lot of people see food as. And even in the school system, a lot of the neurodivergent kids, they get them to do things by giving them treats. Well, here, if you write your letter, we'll give you a Skittle and I understand, that they are motivated by those types of things, but it creates a very unhealthy relationship with food in general. Yep.
Our son put on 20 pounds as an 8-year-old in a school for autism that used food as motivation in 1 year. 20 pounds in 1 year as an 8-year-old. Because they would give them the crap of the crap. Well, but I'm highlighting the point of exactly what you just said. Like, yeah, it was used as this motivation, but then it also was impacting his body. And yet we also know the prevalence of obesity and depression and food dependencies and food motivation that exists in that population of people. But even the way that you just talk about it, it's all of this is real and it's around us. I appreciate, though, that you said that to deepen and change the relationship that you had with food, it started with the relationship with yourself. And I would say that that's true for everything. Whether it's your relationship with Jesus and God, your husband, your kids, money, food, it all starts with the relationship with self, I believe, right? Now, others might say the relationship with God or Jesus comes first, but I actually think that the relationship with yourself is the reflection of your relationship with God. That's how I believe, right? I think that the deepest relationship with yourself is the best way to honor the relationship with God. Yet, one of the things that you put on here, that our intake forms are also very, very light. Why? Because I like to have real, raw conversations. I don't prepare questions ahead of time. I don't do a bunch of deep research, but sometimes one or two things pop out that are exactly related to a conversation that we're having. You identified your biggest problem in life or business today as your relationship with money. So through the nature of this kind of relationship with self, this relationship with food, and therefore a self-identified biggest challenge being this relationship with money. How would you describe your relationship with money today? And as we're talking about how you improve your relationship with all the other things, where are you at in the development, improvement, restructuring with your relationship with money?
Yeah, it's something that I've really been working on. And I realized that my self-worth was a big problem. Like, I didn't feel like, I could charge a certain amount in my programs, or because I didn't feel like I was worthy of receiving it. And another thing from my childhood, my dad always lived outside his means. And so he sort of lived on credit cards, and he bought fancy cars, and he, built big houses. And so I think I sort of had shame around that too, because from the outside, everything looked perfect and beautiful, and like we had all these things, but inside we were so unhappy. And so money to me started to look like it wasn't helpful. It just hurt things. You know what I mean? And I didn't see it as a tool. I saw it as something that was judged, and something that I was never going to receive. And that's not true. I mean, my husband and I have gone through times where we didn't have 2 cents to rub together. And, now we live on 5 acres, and we have a beautiful house, and he is a builder. And so we were blessed for him to be able to build our home, but we have lots of nice things now. But those aren't important to me anymore. But I want to strengthen my relationship with money, because the more money I have, the more influence I can have on other people as far as helping. Like, down the road, I want to start a nonprofit. There's a lot of things that I want to do. And all these things that we do as entrepreneurs, they require money.
They do. They do.
You know what I mean? So that is what I'm really working on now, is just, I've worked on my self-worth in a lot of different areas, but that's the one that I'm currently stuck in. So still a work in progress.
How do you respond or process the idea of you deserving something? How does the word deserve mean to you, I guess?
Well, I always had to earn, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't just get love because I was me.
Yep.
It was because I got a good grade, or I hit a triple, or, my room was clean, or, you know what I mean? Like, nobody ever just said that they loved me because they loved me. It was always because I did something for it.
Contingent. Yeah.
And so, I didn't feel like I deserved to have love unless I was performing. And so, in one respect, I'm grateful for that, because I am an overachiever. And so I'm constantly competing with myself.
Yep.
But I can also compare to my peers, and especially being in masterminds like we are, and all of these very high achieving women, it's very easy to compare yourself to what everybody else is doing and what they've accomplished, and you still haven't done the thing, and blah, blah, blah. So it's always there. I mean, like I said, we're always working on that self-worth portion.
Yeah.
I think, but I've come a long way for sure.
I asked that question because it's interesting, because a lot of people who struggle with the concept of self-worth don't resonate or don't receive the word deserve well, for all the reasons you just described so eloquently, by the way. What's interesting is the definition of self-worth is what you believe you deserve. By definition, self-worth is what you believe you deserve, right? Whereas value whereas my brain just blanked on the word I was going to give you an example of. It's correlated, though, to the value that you deliver in the world, right? And so what's really funny is when we look at the concept of these two things, the relationship with money is attached to that as well. I'm curious, because I think you call it self-worth. What's interesting, though, is I sense something a little bit different in you, and it's connected to shame. And I asked you in the beginning of the show if I could give you some feedback, so I'm just leaning into that as we're in it live. There's 2 tracks to shame. The first is I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. It's where most people live, And I'd be lying if I told you I wasn't there in moments, but that was not my predominant narrative. But that's also why I could not identify it as shame for a long time in my life. Why? Because the second narrative of shame is when you shut that down, you show up in the arena and you go to battle. I'm an overachiever. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go start my business. I'm going to start a publishing company to help other women. I'm going to write my book. It's who the fuck do you think you are? Who do you think you are to do those things? You resonated with that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I was picking up in with you. And what I'm trying to highlight is that because of the contingency of it always being dependent on something, what you did for people versus who you were, it also is that top side of shame. And so what I'm going to challenge you on, because I don't want to in any way, nor do I ever want to tell anybody how they feel or how they should feel. Okay. So I say this very clearly as a caveat for you and whoever's listening. But what's interesting is I do believe that there's still components of it that are self-worth related for you. But I actually think it's that top side of shame that keeps you checked more often than not. Who are you to charge so much for your services? Who are you to be in the room with these women? Who are you to live your life and do so and be happy with the things that you have and not be making $10 million a year, right? Like, because you live in a way that the sign behind you says it. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. And yet you've never conformed, and yet you've always been independent. And so what I want to challenge you on is that, yes, I think there's some elements of self-worth, but to the whole point of what you just said, with more has more ability to deliver. And I'll share one of my greatest lessons from one of my mentors that is, I think, directly relatable to you. He said, Brian, one of your biggest failure points is your ability to receive. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've seen you run through walls. I've seen you raise money, like ridiculous amounts, millions of dollars for other organizations. If the perceived benefit is for someone else, nothing stops you. The second you perceive it benefits you, you don't ask. He was right. But then he went on to tell me this, and I believe this is also true about you. So I'm sharing the reflection of myself in a way that I hope benefits you. By the way, you're going to be an overachiever, whether shame is driving it and self-worth is driving it or not. Why? Because you're on a constant pursuit to be the best version of who you are, and you've always been that way. That's hardwired. Yes, it's a gift from the trash from your past, but it's also who you are no matter what. You're also giving and empathetic no matter what. You also are a faith-based woman who believes in giving and helping and bringing other people along and meeting them where they are, no matter what. And so the real thing about this is there's a lack of congruence for people like you who struggle to receive, because your inability to receive is actually doing the same people you want to impact a disservice. And so the flip side to this is, what I know about you is the more you receive, the more money you make. Anything that benefits you is going to flow right through you to impact everyone else around you. In your family, your husband, your son, your daughters, your community, your church, the women that you help in your publishing company bring their truths and stories into the world. And so hear that for what it is. But my friend, like, I get it. And I've struggled with my relationship with money as well. But what I really want to flip on you, on your head on this one is, I'm not sure it's 100% a worth thing, though it is a shame thing. And so it's up to you to determine, how do you catch which one it is in the moment so that you're actually paying attention to the proper narrative so you can update the programming most effectively for yourself.
No, thank you for saying that. And I do receive that from you. And I think you're spot on. I think you're exactly right. And I can tell myself that, but there's still something in there that I got to work through to make me truly believe it.
Well, it's the lack of congruence between what you know up here and what you feel, right? Like, that's the gap.
Yeah.
It's the cellular memory from the old stuff that still triggers and makes you feel the scarcity, feel the block, feel the shame, feel the lack of worth. It's here, and up here, you're like, no, I know this. Right? But that's the moment for you to catch yourself, is the moment it rises in the first place. And to reposition and ask those questions, right? Is this congruent to what I know and believe? Right? Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me, or the trash from my past? And then most importantly, here's what I'm going to say to you, because I think this question will matter most, especially given the criticism and the dynamics of what you discussed. What am I protecting right now? Because if you can answer the question of what I'm protecting in that moment, especially given the dynamics of what you said you believe I'm correct on, then it's ultimately, what are you protecting? It's, I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be criticized. I don't want to be thought as being extravagant. I don't want to be looked at as egotistical. I don't want to be looked at as whatever the narratives in the chatter are, and that you're protecting it. It's like, I'm already blessed already. I don't need more, even though I want to fix my relationship with money. I mean, we live on this 5-acre lot. My husband built the house. We're so blessed. Like, but at the same time, like, you want to bless more, right? And so what am I protecting? I think that's going to be your power question. Because if you can figure out what's behind the armor that's rising, you'll have a glimmer of a shot of reprogramming it.
Yes. Thank you so much. I just love you.
Thank you for giving me the privilege of reflecting that back in a way that you received it so beautifully. I have one or two more questions as we wrap up. I know you got to get going to pick up your son here relatively quickly. You're doing this publishing company for the point of creating a safe space for women to heal while writing their truth. Why is that so important to you for that group of people?
Because I loved my publisher. But there was a disconnect through the writing process. And because my story was so heavy, and as I was writing it, there were things that were coming up that I thought I had processed that I realized were still there. And so a lot of times, and I've talked to other people, men and women, that talked about writing their book, and they're like, I got to this certain place and I got stuck and then I stopped. And so I just don't want other women to start writing and it get really heavy and them not put their truth into the world. I don't want that to stop them. So that's why I wanted to create a safe container through my publishing company to do that.
And so the question that leads me to is what is it about your process or the space that you create that differentiates so much from the other publishing companies either that you experienced or that are out there? Because I love the mission. So how are you creating that vehicle in a way that the women can literally drive it and move where they need to?
Yeah, there's more one-on-one with me, which I think I was missing with the other publisher. There's more time just with me to sort of create with them. But, and I didn't come up with this, but the way that they had me write, or the suggestion that I got, was to speak it into Zoom or however you record on your computer, which made me look at me while I was speaking it. And so then I would copy and paste the transcription and put it into another document. But that helped me so much just to talk to myself while I was writing. So that's part of the process in my publishing company. I have them speak it to themselves through Zoom and then transcribe it. But there's so many things that come out. And when you're just sort of word vomiting, there's things that you remember. And, you can go back and listen to it later and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even remember saying that. So it helps it to flow better if you speak it instead of, I love pen to paper. And there's times for that too, but speaking it also speeds up the process and it gives you a little mirror work at the same time. So,
and I'm happy that you said the mirror work, because what it really is doing as well is moving and helping heal, right? And so what I love about what you're doing and facilitating is not just allowing other women to bring their truth into the world to make them accessible to help other women, but you're actually allowing them to heal through the process of doing so. Because of the process of how you're getting them to speak it, move the energy, and release things that, even to your point, as I was going through my own process, I processed things I thought I had processed. And sometimes that's what happens when we are speaking versus when we are writing. There's less of a filter between what we think and feel and what comes out than when we're sitting in front of a computer and a keyboard or even with a pen to paper. And so I love the intentionality and the space that you create for them. Again, I know we're right towards the tail end of our interview and we're coming right up here. I'm so grateful for all of what you shared today, the ways that you went in each individual direction to be able to provide some insights and some light into your experiences, but also so clearly communicated in a way that gives people actually solutions if they slow down and really listen to what you've said. We're going to have everything for your publishing company, your book, and all of your links in the show notes. But is there a closing message you'd like to leave the listeners with today?
I think just get to know yourself. Like, you are beautiful, you are wonderful, you are smart, you are creative, And God put you here for a specific purpose. And I think that what I realized was that it is a disservice to the world if you don't share your gift.
Yeah. My friend, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
And for those of you who just watched Cristina flip open her lid and jump in, she was very aware of some of the early patterns and stories that created limitations in her feeling, her thinking, and the way she moved through the world. And a whole repeat pattern of trauma put her into a position where she was eating her feelings instead of being able to feel them like God intended. If you actually pay attention to so much of what was discussed today in the lessons learned through occupational therapy and what was needed to be able to communicate in a very literal and systematic step-by-step way with her kid on the spectrum, or the lesson of unconditional love that didn't come until years later, Christina's still on the process. She's still developing, but she's bringing others along with her. And her transparency and vulnerability not only make it accessible for her to be able to heal every time she speaks her own story, but she's creating that space for each and every one of you. You can have the same freedoms. You can have the same types of growth, but it's going to require you to be honest with yourself, to listen to yourself, to build relationship with yourself. And you do that by flipping open your lid and scanning your can. We'll see y'all next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. But to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.